Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Scott Stedman podcast. I hope you are having a wonderful week. Today, joining me in this conversation today is Micah Current. Micah, how are you doing today?
Well, better than you are with the whole situation with your dog.
Yeah, like for those of you, as before you started, I was telling Micah that my dog got sprayed by a skunk, and it was the first time that we've ever had to deal with a dog being sprayed or any animal or person being sprayed by a skunk. So we actually I looked for a recipe online, like how to deal with it, and they said try a concoction of baking soda, dish soap, and hydrogen peroxide. And luckily, those were the things we had on hand. So we made a concoction, wet the dog down, threw that stuff on our dog, washed it off, put regular dog shampoo, gave her another bath with the dog shampoo, washed it off, and surprisingly, the smell went away. Not outside though, that was still there, but at least the smell on the dog was completely gone. Maybe like a little faint trace of it still existed somewhere, but for the most part, it was like, oh wow, this really worked. But we were doing that like 10:30 at night, so it was uh it was not fun. It still smells like skunk outside our house. So
You said there was this huge puddle on the sidewalk.
oh yeah, because we looked at like kind of the direction of where the skunk must have spayed our dog, and when you look, like the pavement, and it looked like it just like there's like a blast radius. Like you could just see like the cone of the spray from where the skunk was and where it was. I'm like, man, I know they can shoot far. I think when I was watching like a documentary on animals or something, I think they can spray up to like 75 feet. But just seeing how the the width of the spray was in the cone direction, my goodness, that thing was so like we're as I'm watching my dog, I'm trying not to. Laura's like, "Why don't you like wet the stuff down?" I'm like, "No, because I want to see where it is. Because I don't want to step in it." So eventually, when all the soap and all that hydrogen peroxide mix got on the ground and was flowing down into the sidewalk, I'm like, "Okay, now I'm going to spray it because at least I'll just spray all that stuff in to kind of break up all those enzymes that make all that nasty smell outside." But yeah, that was my day last night.
Is it bad that I think I can imagine Peter getting sprayed by a skunk.
Uh, I don't know. He would. Here's the thing. I think he would notice it and run away. My daughter would probably think it's a cat and would want to try to pet it. If anyone were to get sprayed, I think my daughter would be not my son, because he'd be like, "Oh, skunk," and run away.
What's wrong on that one?
Yep. All right. So actually, today we're going to be talking about something Church of God related. Micah, you informed me that there is a program or a resource tool for leaders in churches called TIPS, which is Transitional Interim Pastor Services. And what this is it's through the national office, through the Church of God Ministries, where you can get a interim pastor who's been through this training. And what this interim would do is do a church health assessment, do some sort of spiritual renewal, and then kind of develop a plan for effective ministry and implement that plan. Um, so, with that being said, it's kind of this new thing. I believe I'm 100% positive that our good friend Jeanette Flynn has her hand in this because she's really big on interim pastor. She was the one who suggested that instead of going to a general director after Jim retired, that we would have a interim director to kind of help with the transitional things within the Church of God. So that's why we have um, Monte Dillard kind of running things now as the interim within the Church of God Ministries. So this kind of seems like a new thing they want to try to do to again try to help with impacting local churches. to create healthier churches, and to do an assessment. Now, with all that being said, one of the things I was looking at was it looks like it's kind of optional. And it also seems like that for state leaders, um, if you're a church, like let's say if you're a church in Virginia and you are without a pastor and you need an interim, instead of going to the national office, you can just kind of pick from a handful of interims that are there in that are in your state. So it seems like that there is some type of leniency between going through the national office to go through their tips program, or you could try to get an interim through your state or regional director. So Micah, since you kind of leaned me on to this, what were some of your thoughts um, about this service that's being provided to churches and leaders?
Well, I think it's a good idea in theory. Um, it's I was I don't know if you've been on staff at a church when a senior pastor has left, but the whole idea of there being that vacancy, it just seemed, and I've been there, but it just takes so long for them to get somebody to fill the role until uh, I'm sorry, it takes so long to get somebody in that interim role, and then like how long have you wasted time wise getting a new pastor in there?
Yeah.
And like I said, the tips program in theory, it sounds good, but it's like, does is it worth having to wait on that? And you mentioned something about Virginia. I think in Ohio they just have this list of people that are willing to be interims, and like so, if you and I wanted to be interim pastors, we just tell Ohio ministries that we're willing to be interim pastors in the state of Ohio, and then they just when one becomes available, they kind of just go down the list and see who's available to do
Yeah.
so. And I don't know. I think there should be a way that you could, merge the two together
Hmm.
and make it a little bit more practical.
Yeah. And I agree with you. I know the thing from Ohio because when I first started ministry, I was on that list. And what was nice about the list is it was broken down between the different sections of Ohio. So Northeast Ohio, Northwest Ohio, Central, South, etc. And so it was always good that if there was a pastor that was gone, you could kind of fill that role. However, I don't really know if I would have considered myself an interim, even though I had to do some interim work at some of the churches. I mean, I felt like I was more pulpit supply, like I was there to preach, I was there to kind of make sure services were going. But as far as like interim, like what an interim actually does by definition, um, I kind of did a little bit of that, but I definitely was not trained. And I think what makes tips a little bit different is just kind of reading through, and you can find this on the Church of God website for those of you who are Church of God ministers. If you just type in transitional interim pastor service or tips Church of God, it will come up. But it looks like they have it, like it says that the ministry uses trained interim pastors, those who have a track record of effective ministry, to come and serve a congregation for several months while the search process takes place. So, couple things. You're getting somebody who's trained in the interim process. It's not just me who's fresh out of seminary and who's just recently ordained, trying to find a church, and I'm kind of going through this path to just try to, at least
That
get
would be
some
kind of
experience.
sorry, but that would be kind of stupid, right? Like you're like throwing you to the wolves, because like seriously though, because like how damaged is the church you're going into? How unhealthy is it? Um how on fire is it? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like it could be in pretty bad shape. And like if you were a 22, 23-year-old that just got out of seminary, just got ordained, you
and
don't
have
want to
no interim training or any type of counseling training.
or any
Like
like
luckily I had counseling training when I graduated seminary because I actually did the counseling track. But yeah, like, and that was the thing. Like one particular church who's not around anymore. Like there's a lot of problems,
yeah.
and it was one of those things where they even asked me if I wanted to be the pastor there, and I said, "Well, I'm looking for a church, but I didn't want to be the pastor at church. Like I was there, and luckily, the job up in Cortland came up, and it's like, okay, that seems to be a better fit. But I wasn't going to take this church. I was like doing pulpit supply, and that's one thing I said. I was doing pulpit supply and kind of helping them a little bit with some stuff, but I definitely was not trained like as a full interim. Um,
Well, I think too that like, you know, you're kind of at the mercy of whatever the church's bylaws are, right? Like, so if you're an interim and all they want you to do is preach and lead, like board meetings and things like that, you don't really get a say in the matter, but you get to lead it. And because you're not officially their pastor.
yeah,
And, you know, it gets kind of sticky because um, you could have a really good pastor who can really preach and really be good at the administrative side of things, but their hands are kind of tied because of the way the church's bylaws are set up.
yeah. Yeah. And I think, yeah, and I think the other thing, and I think this is kind of like when you have an interim, like if you're just opting to just find an interim within your state instead of going through the TIPS program, is you're kind of at the mercy of what the church wants and kind of how the church views their interims. So, like you said, like based on their bylaws, if, they are obeying their bylaws, because that's a whole different conversation, but you may think like, okay, I'm an interim, so I'm going to kind of maybe help shake some things, try to help some things, try to do like maybe a little bit of a gauge the health of the church, and can get to the point where they're like, no, we just want you to preach. And it's like, okay, well then when the next pastor comes in, they're going to have to deal with all this baggage, especially depending on how the last pastor left and how they're processing and healing from that too, if they left on not great terms. Um, so to kind of go back to this TIPS program, they talk a little bit about how it works. So if you decide to go through TIPS or through the national office, if you can find someone who's a TIPS certified interim, um, they basically will begin with a church health assessment, focus on a time of spiritual renewal, and they will also do a planning and implementation plan for the church, the health of the church. So again, when this interim comes in, yeah, they may be preaching on Sunday, but they're going to do a church health assessment. They're going to do a renewal, do a plan for renewal. They'll try to also develop a plan for an effective ministry and implement that plan. Now, that being said, the conversations we've had with Jeanette, both on our podcast and even away from the podcast, I mean, Jeanette, who's trained and has done interim pastoring for a long time, one of the things that she talks about is sometimes she'll go to places and basically say, yeah, you guys are DOA, basically, like you're a dead church. Like, and that may be the kind of the fear that if you have someone who's trained, um, they're probably going to say, you guys might need to close up shop. because right now, the way things have gone, the things I've assessed over the past years of this church and looking at the history of this church, I mean, it's over for you. You might as well close up shop now and be done. Um, so that is the fear versus you get a 23-year-old seminary, someone graduated seminary, they can go into a church that, yeah, it's pretty much dead, but they're like, hey, you try to be that positive person, like, well, hey, I'm sure there's still some life in here. We got to trust in God and, kind of be very optimistic about that. So I think that's kind of something that and also if you decide to go through the TIPS program, you're having a meeting with the board. They have a board and assessment. Um, and basically they're going to explain how it works. So especially if you're a church that has bylaws saying, here's how what interims can and can't do. TIPS is going to say, no, here's our program. Here's what our people are trained to do. Here's what we're going to do. So if you want somebody, you're going to have to basically adhere to the way we're going to do things. So it's almost like bylaws have no influence on a TIPS trained specialist that's going to be coming into your church. We have our own system. We have our own way of doing things. So if you contact us, your church and your leaders are going to have to know that this is how we're going to do things. And here's kind of the process, and here's the timeline of what's going to take place while you guys are searching for a pastor. And that's how they're going to do it. So I guess in some ways, if you are a church who's like, we don't want anyone telling us what to do, or we don't want the national office telling us what to do, then the TIPS program is probably not going to be good for you. Or actually, probably having any pastor at this point is probably not going to be good for you.
Well, churches too don't really have it. Like, to be fair,
Yeah,
if your church is a healthy church and your senior pastor's been there for like 8 to 10 years, 10 to 12 years, and it's just time for uh, he or she to move on, and or have been offered another position, or they're retiring, whatever it may be, and the church has been left in a really good place. It's you know that's a whole different story.
yeah,
Um, and uh, my assumption is that the churches of that size and that magnitude, they have a plan in place. They have things in place in case they're, whatever would happen in respect to being an interim or needing an interim or having some sort of transition in place. And so, you know, part of the reason a lot of these churches are DOA, like Jeanette was talking about, we talked to her at that point, was is that they're not healthy and they don't have anything.
mm-hmm.
And so she texted me, I think it was last week. And so she's an interim church. Her and her husband are kind of like traveling in the Pacific Northwest, and she's taken a church up in, I don't remember if it's Oregon or it's Washington State. But anyway, she she called me on a Sunday afternoon and she was like, they have an iPod, no, not an iPod. They have an iPhone on a tripod, and it's killing me because every time she would walk, in front of the platform, like before church started or whatever, like people would trip over it and knock it over, and it's already turned on to the live stream, so it just looks bad. And then she also likes to move around when she preaches, and so she didn't know like kind of like the
Yeah,
framework, but she could not do. And so God bless the small churches.
yeah. So yeah, so when we think about this TIPS program, they if on the website they have benefits to the church and the benefits for the incoming pastor. And here's what they say. So benefits to the church, teaches the church to celebrate the interim time as an opportunity to grow and listen for God's voice, build boards and congregational morale during the interim, and diffuses anxiety that is very normal in every pastoral transition, provides high quality coaching and consulting for the local church, and the presence of a seasoned and wise interim reduces the frantic hurry to select a new pastor. And then the benefits for the new pastor is that there's a full church health assessment completed to identify areas where improvement is needed. So again, the interim's not there to fix everything. They're there to assess it. Maybe they can start the process of doing some fixing, but at least the new pastor's going to kind of know where the interim left off because there'll be a detailed report or assessment. Community profile is completed to identify needs. NCS incoming pastor's notebook is complete. So they'll have basically a whole, so when the new pastor comes in, they're going to have a whole chart and of everything that's going to know about the church, the strengths, the weaknesses of this church. A new pastor can build on the momentum achieved, and the pastoral profile helps ensures a good match between the congregation and incoming pastors. So basically, the way I'm interpreting that last part is basically we're going to make sure that the pastor who's coming into your church is going to be a good fit. It's not going to be like, oh, here's this country bumpkin church and here's this city pastor who pastored like in Pittsburgh coming in here wants to do all this like big city stuff, and it just becomes like a clash. You're going to find someone who's going to fit the bill pretty good. So, I mean, with all that, and I think this is one of the important things I think it's kind of clear is that interim pastoring, the way I've defined it through all my research, through my doctorate, on looking at transitions in churches, an interim is usually should only be called if there needs to be if there is some church health concern. If there is no if there is no church health concern, if everything's been fine, there hasn't been a big thing that has been damaging to the church, then for the most part, you probably don't need an interim. You probably just need pulpit supply, someone that preach, or even if but I would say if you're a healthy church, your elder board should be able to take care of the preaching responsibilities, and you don't really need a interim or a pulpit pastor to pulpit supply in that transition. You should have a strong leadership team to be able to do all that. That's my opinion. So as far as if you're a church that's hurting, if you're a church that needs healing, like for me as a church, as if I'm a church leader, this sounds good. For me as a new pastor coming into a church, knowing that this church has been selected someone from TIPS, this also looks good because I know times I've walked into churches after they've had an interim that's been from the state, or even maybe they've had like 2 or 3 interims in the process that have went through this church before they got me as their pastor. Like there's times where I come in as a pastor and I know nothing about this church. The interim doesn't say anything, except for like, oh, they're nice people, and they leave, and it's like, okay. So, and sometimes, at least the benefit I had with Cortland is the elder board was very transparent about the way the last pastor left, some of the woundedness that he left here, even some of the history of this church. So I knew pretty much when I was coming in the baggage that the church was carrying. Whereas when I went to the last church that I pastored at in Virginia, it was kind of made like, oh, this is a great church. This is wonderful. And then over the years I was there, I started to uncover a lot of unresolved pain that was kind of just like tucked away and that needed to be healed. And it was one of those things where it's like, oh, well, I'm sure the interim could have told me some of this stuff, but never did. So the fact that for a new pastor that you're getting a notebook, you're getting a report, you that's going to identify the strengths and weaknesses of this church that you're pastoring, And knowing that you've had a trained interim in there doing all this work to prepare the church for your arrival, like that sounds great. Um, that sounds great to me. Again, but I mean, if you're a church that is not in need of any type of healing, then this isn't going to really benefit you at all. Um, that's just my 2 cents. What about you, Micah?
Um, I've seen churches where there have been transitions, and it's just not went well at all.
Yeah,
And we keep using the term DOA. That they probably should just shut their doors. But I've also seen churches that have went through and honestly assessed where they were, honestly assessed their health, honestly assessed people that go there, etc. And the church has exploded as a result, in a good way. Like it's just they're growing, their numbers are great, they got a new pastor, so all those things are important. But like, so that church is somewhere in Ohio, and I forget, but it was one of my leadership focus students when I was teaching leadership focus, and she was just like, we were down to like 4 families, and we would show up and have church on Sunday, if you want to call it that. And then they were finally like, we need help. And so I'm not saying it always works out like a Cinderella story in respect to like, oh, we're going to call tips and they're going to come in and they're going to help us and do assessments and all that. And it's just kosher as can be, because it may not work for everybody, because the church, it really just boils down to how healthy the church is.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. It really does boil down to how healthy the church is. Um, and I think again that kind of goes back to, an interim is really only needed for churches that need extra help, churches who may have to deal with some wounded history within their church's identity, or even with the last pastorship, depending on how it went down. So now to kind of like wrap it up, how much does this cost? Like if I said, "Hey, I'm going to call Church God Ministries. I want to go through this tips program." How much is it going to cost? And according to their website, it says our commitment to the church is that having a full-time interim will cost no more than the church is currently paying its lead pastor in its total package. So meaning if I want to get a tips person, we would be paying this person basically equal or less um, than what the lead pastor's pastoral package is. And then they say we work very hard to make sure finances are never a reason not to have an a intentional interim. So basically, it's not going to be like, okay, you want an interim, it's going to cost you $80,000. They're like, nope, whatever you pay your lead pastor, that's that's who you're going to have. That's how much it's going to be payment for. How the interim pastor is selected, the NCS board will do a pre-assessment. Um, we'll talk, and then they'll recommend somebody who they think would be a good fit. Um, and basically, they will present it to the church board, and if the church agrees it's a good fit, then that's it. If the church is like, no, this isn't a good fit, then they kind of go back to the drawing board and they try to find someone else who might be a good fit. So it's an ongoing process, but basically, it's not like it's being forced. Basically, the pulpit committee or the church elder board, they're going to say, hey, they also have a say on who the tip person is. And then they say, how, and then the last FAQ is how do we begin? And basically, if you want to, you call us, we kind of guide you through the whole process, kind of the timeline, how it works. And then this is the part where at the beginning where I said, well, I think you can either go through TIPS or you can go through your state organization. Because the very last sentence, it says, we invite state and regional pastors to join the conversation to foster partnerships and cooperation in serving your congregation. So in traditional Church of God fashion, national office is creating this new program. And then it's like, hey, we have this thing that we're going to offer to you guys. Here it is. But we're also not going to infringe or step on the toes of your state and regional leaders. If they want to participate, if they want to foster partnerships with us, we accept it. We want it. That's great. But at the same time, if you're a state and you're like, no, thank you, we don't want to do this TIPS program, then the state doesn't, then the state leaders don't have to. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean if an individual church wants to say, hey, I want to go through the TIPS program, the state pastor's not going to be like, oh, no, you can't do that, whatever. It seems like there is that autonomy of being able to choose which path you want. But at the same time, this is also not something where the national office is saying, okay, everybody, here's this new program. Everybody has to fall in line now. It's more of like, here's a resource. If your church wants it, it's here. If your state director wants it, it's here. But again, you don't have to take it if you don't want it.
Yeah, but then you also have the idea of the old school way of doing things, where they just have the list of the state and all right, Scott, we want you to go to blah church. And, then you're
Yeah.
kind of at the mercy that are you interested? And then uh other churches kind of just handle it internally. We really didn't talk about that, but some do.
Yeah.
So
Yep. And I think it's also and again, overall, I don't have anything negative to say about this because again, if you are a church that's hurting and this is a church that really needs to you got to that point where you go, we need some type of direction, we need some type of guidance, we need a path towards healing so we can kind of get back on track. Like this is great and really it's not going to cost you anything more than how much you're paying your regular pastor. Because again, this person who's coming in, they're not doing pulpit supply. It's not like, I don't know. I think for me, it was like when I did pulpit supply in Ohio, I think the going rate was I got paid $70 and then also got my mileage taken care of. So each Sunday I'm getting $70 and plus mileage. Like that's still pretty cheap then as opposed to paying a pastor. But at the same time, this TIPS person, this trained person, is doing a church health assessment, is working on a path for spiritual renewal, is kind of doing all this other stuff to kind of help you be the best church that you can be. So overall, I think this is a good thing for churches who really need the extra TLC to kind of help prepare themselves for their new pastor and to kind of heal from some past wounds as well.
how well known it is.
Was that
I wonder how well known it is.
probably not because I didn't, when you asked me about it, I'm like, what is this? So I don't think it's well known. And again, I haven't seen any of it on any of the Church of God's like social media posts. So I feel like if this is something that is important, then it needs to be promoted. And as much as the Church of God would love to post like these heritage hymns on every Wednesday or something, me posting a heritage hymn is not going to help drive my church forward to kind of help me about, oh, here's some of the things that the Church of God offers. So I think whoever their social media person is, which is not me, I would say, hey, did you know that we have this transitional interim pastor service or tips that can really help churches be revitalized and have a great health, and all this great stuff is included for the cost of, what you pay a regular pastor, at least for, for a few months before you get your next lead to come in. Like, I'm sure more people knew about this. And I mean, how old is this? Because I don't even see a date on when this started. Is this recent? Has it been around for a couple years? Like, I don't know. It doesn't tell me anything. And even the link that says, if you want to learn more about Next Step Church Services, click on this link. And when I click on it, it says, this connection is not private and it will not let me go to this page. So it gives me an error message. So, but yeah, I mean, I think if people knew about this, I think this could be a really big program, but I didn't know about it. And I think you probably knew about it because of your relationship with Jeanette.
Yeah. Honestly, I didn't or don't know how long it's been.
Yeah, cool.
Please, Scott's replying to a message.
Yeah, sorry, I'm replying to a message. Sorry, it's always something.
Good thing you can edit this.
Yeah, I will edit this. Sorry. That's the problem when you're doing a podcast while you're working at the same time. Sometimes work comes in. But no, but other than that, like literally churches, if you are in a time of transition and you need an interim to kind of do some healing work, and you as a church, you probably want to see where you're at. Like maybe there is something that we can do to kind of breathe new life into our congregation. Maybe we do need to call it quits. Like this would be a great thing to kind of help have someone come in who's trained, who knows what they're doing, who has a history of success in doing interim work in ministry, and this might be something that will be great. So I would look it up. Again, you can go to just jesussubject.org, just search for tips or interim services, and you should be able to find the page that gives you all the information, plus a email where you can go and take care of it. So that's it. So friends, thank you so much for listening. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and we will be back on with another episode. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the Scott Stedman Podcast. The Scott Stedman Podcast is made possible by support from our listeners. We thank listeners like Patty and Scott, whose support goes to this podcast's continual growth and maintenance. If you want to support this podcast, you can do so in a number of ways. First, feel free to give us a 5-star rating if you enjoyed this episode and share it with your friends. If you'd like to financially support the Scott Stedman Podcast, you can go to the website ko-fi.com/the Scott Stedman Podcast. That website again is ko-fi.com/the Scott Stedman Podcast. Thank you so much for listening.